Sabrina, very well welcome to this interview. Thank you so much for taking the time and for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I've been looking forward to this.
You are an SPC 5 certified trainer. You are also a program director and release train engineer at AmerisourceBergen, a US-based company, part of the Fortune Top 10. And before we get started, I want to talk about the history of your SAFE journey. So can you talk a bit more about when you get started, how you got started, and also about the size of your SAFE implementation at Amerisource?
Yes, of course. So our journey started in October of 2014 when we had our first event. And that's actually when I became a Scrum Master, and probably that was version 3, I believe, just to give some reference to where we are now. We had 8 teams and 51 team members. As of October of this year, we had our 29th PI planning event. We are now up to just about 18 teams up and down, one or more less, and a little over 100 team members.
Wow, awesome. Can you also talk a bit why you actually decided to implement SAFE? What were the reasons to use SAFE as your framework and not something else?
Well, as many companies find, and sometimes the hard way, this waterfall was not working. We support an oncology software that requires bug fixes and enhancements to keep up with the times. And the waterfall method was draining us, and the customers were having to wait too long for releases and fixes.
Right, makes sense. So let's also talk about SAFE in practice, specifically about the importance of the PI planning. What relevance has the PI planning as an event for your organization?
PI planning is the event that sets the tone and is the event that prepares our teams for what is going to be approaching, that our customers are relying on to be delivered, that quality software that they can depend on.
Got it. And in that regard, preparation for the actual PI planning is also a topic that is often discussed. So I also wonder, how do you take care of the preparation for actually a PI planning event in your organization?
So as the time approaches, a month or so ahead, it's always planned. I work with my Scrum Masters, and we look at the layout, where we're going to be, the setting in the past when it wasn't virtual, where it will be, how many teams, how many team members, food, breakouts, communication. There's a lot involved. Guest speakers, that's all taken into consideration.
Right. What would you say, like approximately how much work or time do you need to prepare before PI planning? Do you have like a 2-week time frame that you invest there, or what's the approximate time effort that you put into the preparation?
So 2 weeks is good. I like to have more than 2 weeks, just because I don't like to leave things to the last minute, but at least 2 weeks, because when we're preparing, we're also preparing our teams for what's coming up, because we don't like to leave them guessing what the format's going to be, what the agenda is going to be. So that, and then training if needed for tools that are going to be used. And of course, with this environment, we've switched tools a couple of times, and that takes a little time.
Right. You talked about the environment. COVID-19 hit earlier this year and basically also changed the way that we work with each other, the way that we conduct PI plannings. In that regard, when were you actually forced to think about going remote for the first time, and how did you approach that at Amerisource?
So I had about 2 weeks notice. Our company put out that we would not be traveling anymore as of the beginning of April 1st. And mid-April was our PI planning event that was scheduled. So within that 2 weeks, I had to come up with a plan, train whatever plan that would be, run it by the lead team, my fellow lead team members, train the Scrum Master team if needed, so the Scrum Master team could train their teams on the plan that we would use.
Got it. And by just making it happen in just 2 weeks, I can imagine you also faced certain challenges. So, what were some of the challenges that you faced with going remote, and how did you solve them?
Challenge. So for me, it's always communication. Communication is probably always challenging. And then besides that, when we have big room PI planning events, right, we have the ability to move around and the transparency to view the boards and such. So transcribing that actual in-person big room planning to a remote venue is what I was shooting for.
Right. And how do you actually do that? Like, did you use any specific tools, or what was the solution for that challenge?
Yeah. So since we had 2 weeks, it was work with what we had access to. I had access to the mural planning board. Not mural. It's not a planning board. I made it a planning board. Mural is not a tool that was designed for planning. So I designed sort of rooms for each of the teams to make it easier for the scrum masters. And then after I did that, then I met with the scrum masters and trained them on how to use Mural. And then the scrum masters trained their teams on how to use Mural.
Got it. And how was your experience with that solution in the first place?
So it's difficult because it is a very hands-on tool. If we were working in one room all together the whole time and didn't have breakouts, it might have worked better, but it requires a lot of manipulation. And besides that, there's a lot of movement if it's not locked down. So the experience was people were getting aggravated and distracted because items were moving on, iterations, or sticky notes were moving and what have you. It was distracting.
Got it. And another challenge that you might face in that regard is to really also onboard and make sure that your teams and people that are part of your teams are ready for the actual planning. So how do you onboard the different teams in a remote setting?
So the onboarding was that I trained my team members, and then after that, I realizing that I needed a license. We had to obtain around 100 more license for Mural through the company, which I had to do myself, do all the communication. And then once they had the access, then make sure that those scrum masters were able and ready to train, and that we were all on the same page about how we were going to approach this PI planning event using that tool.
Right. So then did you first remote PI planning. What was the feedback of the teams and the people attending the actual planning?
So they were happy and proud that we pulled it off, as teams working all remote. However, the least amount of variability that you can provide, provides more consistency to people and makes people more comfortable. And Mural was highly variable, the use of it. Also, the fact that it didn't really provide the big room feel, and it didn't provide us the ability to use one format that everyone was familiar with, and there weren't, as I mentioned, a lot of variations.
Right. So there you actually face a big decision, right? Do you stick with the tool set that you feel it might be working okay, but it's not like the perfect fit? Or do you then switch and retrain everybody again and look for another solution? So how did you solve that?
Yeah, that's a great point, because when you, again, I mentioned having consistency provides people with more security, or feeling less, feeling like things are less hectic, I believe, especially with this environment. So thinking about what I could have done to how we would improve using the feedback we received on the Mural tool, I started to examine that. However, at the same time, I had met you in October of 2019 at the SAFE Summit, and you reached out to me out of the blue, which was quite fortunate, because that was a huge dilemma. I didn't want this work to be extra work for the team members. Their work was PI planning, not having to worry about how to use a tool and train for it. And, oh, will I mess it up? And how will we do this? And how will we do that? So we were able to use your tool, to make a long story short.
Absolutely. And maybe you can also walk a bit or talk a bit about the actual onboarding. So how did you then actually switch the people from Mural to the PI planning app? Were there any big challenges in that regard? Any steep learning curves that you had to tackle? How was the experience and also the feedback of your teams?
First of all, for me, it was 50% less stressful planning for PI planning again, because the tool provided the foundation and the consistency that I knew that we needed. I also knew that the tool would be easy for the team members to learn and use. So that provided comfort. And in fact, that's what happened. I learned, and then I trained the Scrum Master team, and they trained their teams. And a couple days, some of the teams got trained a couple days prior to the PI planning event. And it went off smashingly. It was a great success. Lots of feedback about how great it was not to have to worry about wrecking the boards with the tool. Not lots of feedback about not being distracted, easy to learn. And the big plus is that for the first time ever, even with in-room PI planning, we have integration with Azure DevOps, which we never had. So that's taken another step out of our planning and post-planning activities.
Yeah, right. That's like the time that you mentioned before, right? You want to
Yes.
let the people focus on the planning and not waste any of their valuable
Yes.
time with manual copy pasting or anything of that sort.
Correct. Well, yes, and the same thing goes for post-PI planning, right? To be able to, for the Scrum Master to be able to jump back in with their teams without having to perform the housekeeping duties of moving information from the boards back into Azure DevOps.
Right. And I'm sure that probably also felt like a relief because you took a bet. You didn't know if it was actually an improvement or not. But then when you got the feedback of the teams, you must have also felt pretty relieved that everything worked out as you wished.
Yes, it was amazing. It's still amazing feeling, honestly.
Awesome. Let's also talk about your other, remote PI planning experience. So usually if you're going remote, you also have to put way more energy into things like keeping the people engaged or making room for social time, like a happy hour or anything of that sort. So can you also share some best practices and learning that you had in that regard?
Yes. So as I mentioned before, PI planning, we all know it's business to get the PI planning completed, but we like to have fun too. And in person, it's a lot easier. We see each other. There are sometimes we don't see people until PI planning, but we don't have that benefit with the virtual environment. So it was brainstorming that had to be done to think about what can we do to make it less impersonal in a technology environment. So we had icebreakers, such as one was show a picture from your favorite travel, and then team members would share their pictures and about what that picture meant to them. And it allowed us to make more of a personal connection. I also started adding music because I know music that goes a long way with a lot of people with their mood and what have you. So I tried to switch that up. One time it was a COVID theme, all COVID songs, or disco or 80s. And I varied it depending on feedback, but that was a big hit. And then we had teams that got together for virtual happy hours after planning. Wasn't required because we did spend quite a bit of time during the day with planning, but teams members enjoyed it.
Sounds great. And I love these little touches that you put in there with the holiday pictures or also the music, of course. Let's also talk about the tech stack. So you use ADO as your ALM tool. You use the PI planning app to actually conduct the planning. Are there any other tools that you used for remote plannings?
Yes, communication. So I'm just going to refer back to the first time we had Skype. Teams had not been implemented. We used Skype. It was quite a bit of work. Then the company invested in Teams, and we used Teams. So the breakout rooms. All the teams had a breakout room. The main channel was always live. So day one, business context and roadmap were delivered on the main channel. Also, I'd like to mention that another added nice thing to do for the teams is recognition. So in that PI planning, we will recognize colleagues for things they've done. We have a homegrown recognition program. Besides company-wide recognition, service anniversaries and promotions, which is another hit.
So let's also talk about your role as an RTE. As an RTE, you're also an agile change maker and change agent actually in your organization. So going remote, I can imagine you actually also had to really onboard your leadership to make things happen. So how do you actually onboard them on going remote, and also probably making an investment here or there for a new setup or new solutions and tools that you needed along the way?
Well, I think most of it is that I've proven how dedicated I am to the team members and to the company in general. And I've earned the trust of the leadership team. I've earned the trust of my team members that they know that when I have a plan, that it's well thought out. I also recognize, I consider the people part of it, how it may be received in that planning.
So let's also talk a bit about the future. So what is your take? Do you think that remote PI plannings are here to stay, or are we all going back to in-person, like physical plannings again?
That's a great question. I've thought about it as well, thought about it every time, every day. There are many of us that can't wait to get back to the office and have the big room planning. There are others that would rather keep staying at home and have the ability to be remote. We have been remote with teams in the past. However, we didn't have the tools that we have now. And so it didn't work out well when they were remote. Basically, they couldn't really participate in planning after the business and the roadmap presentations were done. So it's going to be a variance, I believe, with us. And I believe it's here to stay.
Right. I think what you describe is something that, like many companies now, it keeps their mind busy, and that they have to really work around that. Some people wanting to stay remote, others wanted to go back to physical planning. Do you think that like a mix could also work, where you have some people joining remote and others are actually in the same room doing physical planning?
Yes. I think it can work as long as we can ensure that if we are on location in a big room, that when we have breakouts, that there are breakout rooms for the remote teams to join with the teams at the office to plan.
I'm curious to see, because I think I've never heard about a mix yet. So it's like either fully remote or fully in person. So I'm really curious to see if a company pulls that off and has a hybrid remote planning. That would be interesting to see.
Yeah, we'll definitely have that. We do have also, I failed to mention, we have remote teams in South America that will not travel here to the United States for planning. So we will be using the tool with them.
Awesome. Curious to hear your experience once you've done that for the first time.
Yes, that'd be great. I'll be happy to share it.
Absolutely. Let's also look at the future. So if there's anything that you could wish for, that could be new technical solutions or changes, or also just general trends that you see coming up for remote PI plannings. What comes to mind if you have a wish list, but also a future outlook, what you see rising up on the horizon?
So I think more opportunity for apps that provide the social aspect for planning, because I really hate to, I'm a social person myself. I really hate to see us lose touch. Technology is awesome, but it can also ruin the social aspect of our behavior.
Right.
So that would be a big ask of mine. However that's done, I don't know, but I'm sure somebody will come up with something.
Is there any last tip or anything else that you would like to share with the audience today?
I think what I'd like to share is that no matter what tool you use, keep in mind that if you go for the tool that requires the least setup, the least amount of energy and planning to train teams, provides you the opportunity to spend more time on the PI planning rather than the preparation, and therefore more contact with your teams, and probably you'll get benefit in the end from the planning.
Perfect. I think that's a wonderful way to end this session. Sabrina, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your story. And we wish you, your teams, and of course also AmeriSource all the best and lots of success with your future plannings.
Thank you.